I saw some of your tweets earlier in the day. I mean, at one point you tweeted, I feel like I can't breathe.
Right. I mean, I think it's really hard to watch this and be able to comprehend it, because in a way it's incomprehensible. It's not even something you want to have a debate about, because it's not a debatable fact. We keep seeing the same sorts of people who look alike be on the losing end of violence by police, and we keep seeing them not be held accountable for those deaths. And this is not like, oh, I bumped into you and we had a bad situation and you'll bounce back. It was just a moment out of your life. The life is over. This is the ultimate kind of sentence, and we're having death sentences passed out on the street before you could even, no matter what the person may have done or not, the person is now dead. So if they have, violated the law, that the justice system should deal with that. That shouldn't be dealt with on the street with ending in the death of the person. And that is a problem, I think. I think a lot of people are offended by that. I think America in general is offended by inequity. It goes against the very grain of what we believe we are as a people.
Dan, you're a former NYPD officer. I know you've been getting a lot of calls from police officers. What have they been saying to you about all this?
Well, they're quite surprised there wasn't an indictment either, I think for opposite reasons, some of them. But given the spectrum, Anderson, of the charges that were out there, from reckless endangerment all the way up to manslaughter, I think a lot of them were surprised. But one quick thing, Anderson, I can't let your guest say this without challenging it. Police officers are not trained to fear black men. That's just not true. I don't know why you would say that. I worked in a community as a police officer that was probably 85 to 90% black. I wasn't trained to fear black men. I was trained to fear men who presented a danger to me. If they were black, white, or Hispanic, it didn't matter. That's just not true.
Well, this is how it feels as a community. When you see a 12-year-old, Tamir, be shot to death and thought of as in 3 seconds.
Hey, just so you know,
12-year-old. So what I'm trying to communicate is how we are feeling as a community as a result of seeing one after the other after the other.
Right,
that it seems like a threat first. My grandfather was a police officer for 33 years in Philadelphia, and as a black officer, he walked the street. He knew the community. He took to play basketball, the police athletic league. So this is not I have police in my family. What we're seeing now, this is a very different temperature. This is a very different relationship. We're in so much pain, we can't even recover.
I understand, and I'm not disputing that the black experience in America has been far different. I'm white. I cannot comprehend what it was like to live under Jim Crow, to have suffered some of the indignities. I can't comprehend that. You are absolutely correct. But that's not what you said. You said that there's somehow a culture in police departments to fear black men. That's not accurate. No, that's a different argument.
What I said is how this feels to us. I'm not saying that as fact. I don't know how you're trained and how your culture, but this is how it feels.
I think we should also broaden it to say, not necessarily that people are trained, but that society kind of acculturates us to fear. And that's not necessarily just as specific to police officers, but I think that is all of us. And so that is how the whole justice system becomes corrupted and biased, because we make up the justice system. We are the jurors. We are the people who pass judgment. We are the judges. We are the police officers. All of the bias that exists within society comes out, and we are not always even aware that we have the bias. That is the sad part about it. That is the truth.
Dan, you don't believe that?
No, I think that's just an easy excuse. And for you to say that and say that and just make a massive stereotype that somehow there's this latent bias and everybody instinctively, because they've watched a movie once or twice, fears someone who happens to look different than them is utterly absurd.
Do you have any knowledge of the social science on implicit bias in America? Do you have any knowledge whatsoever? Because there is a mountain. There is a mountain of evidence. There is a mountain of evidence that backs up the notion that there is implicit and explicit bias in American society. And for you to suggest that is not true is ridiculous. And it is offensive on a night like this for you to suggest that.
I think it's ridiculous that you're stereotyping basically all of America and say that somehow that, and I'm not denying, again, for the second time, that the black experience in America is far different. I don't know what it's like to have a hoodie on in Manhattan and not be able to get a cab. I don't. I will never understand that. But for you to stereotype the entire country and quote a few footnotes and social signs,
that's not footnotes.
Say,
those are not footnotes.
Listen,
those are major studies. And don't try to talk out of both sides of your mouth and say that you recognize the bias and then that you deny the bias. You cannot have it both ways. There is bias in America.
You're trying
you
to
cannot
make an
deny
overly
that. And you cannot deny
argument.
science. And this is not a night on which you are going to be able to deny science.
Right. So explain to me, please, the science that everyone in America has some latent
No one says everyone.
bias.
Whenever people start saying everyone and no one, there's always and there is never. They have already stepped outside the boundaries of social science. Dan, that is not the way science works. Science never says always, never, everyone, and no one. It says that there is a bias and it tilts one way or another.
Really?
And there is a mountain of social science that says that there are biases that tilt, and they tilt against everyone.
But Dan, there are tons of studies,
but all other ways.
I mean, there are tons of studies that are done where people are shown photographs of other people and have to make split-second judgments of those people. And, I mean, there are many, many studies showing there is inherent bias in many people.
Right, but how does that relate to this specific case today? We can have a very sensible, reasonable argument about why he was confronted over selling Lucy cigarettes in the street, chokeholds and policing. But to make this big, bold statement that there's somehow a latent bias that may have contributed to this.
I hear you on this. Charles, how do you respond to that?
That is how data is collected. It is collected in the aggregate. If you just try to look at individual cases, you can always make an argument back and forth. What we have to do is to look at all the data, look at all of the cases, and look and see if there is bias in all of the cases. If you can show me the same numbers of people, not only in America, but also right here in New York City, who are white, who have been shot by police officers, and you can show me that it is equitable, then I will listen to that argument. But you cannot do that because it is absolutely not true. The New York Times has up on its site tonight every notable case of police killings in New York City going all the way back to 1990, and it is full of black and brown faces. And you cannot look at that list and say, you can go one situation after another and say, well, I can figure out, well, this person might have been, this officer might have been afraid, this officer might have tried to do something, this officer might have been justified. But when you look at that in the aggregate, you look at all of the data, you cannot come away from that suggesting that there is equity in the number of people who are shot and killed by police officers. That is simply not the case.
Dan, you can respond.
Charles, you don't appear to be open to any argument I make, so it really doesn't matter.
I'm not open to people being killed on the street.
Who said that? Are you just making this up as you go along?
No, nobody's making it up, but we're not going to deny
that. Let Dan respond.
Am I allowed to talk here? Charles, no one is saying that more black men may not have been shot. I don't have that data. What I'm saying is, if we are interested in solving the problem generated from this case, which I agree from both perspectives, there are some very serious problems here with what happened. By you saying that there's a latent bias here and that there may have been some racism in this case without any evidence of it in this specific case does nothing to solve the problem going forward.
I never even drilled down on a specific case. I said you have to look at it in the aggregate. You have to look at all of the data, and you also have to look at society as a whole. If we can acknowledge that there is bias in society, we have to be able to acknowledge that that bias can creep into our justice system. That is what I have said, and I have said nothing more than that, and you will not put words in my mouth.
Charles, well, you've done that for me. I'm not saying, I just got done explaining to you, I am not saying there is not bias. That would be ridiculous. There's not bias in society. Of course there's misogyny, racism, xenophobia. Of course we're a society of men and women. We're all sinners. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you don't seem to have any interest in solving the problem this case generated going forward, other than making bold claims about some cultural problem in America that you can't pinpoint existed in this case. You can't.
So why wasn't he just written a ticket, right? So there's some things that are just very simple that are causing trauma and pain in a way that is sometimes inexplicable. This is a very simple question.
Given what he was alleged to have done.
Right. If you're selling, knockoff handbags, right? When you're selling petty little things on the street, typically you're given a citation. And so in this instance, we can't manage what happened. Particularly, you hear the fellow who was videotaping it, he had just broken up a fight. Eric Gardner had just stopped violence on the street in his community. Then you pick up where they're approaching him for loosies. So this idea of his humanity not being considered, Dan, and not being given something simple like a ticket, Dan, rather than being killed.
Right. Dan, how important to you do you think it will be, if a judge allows it, to hear what the grand jury actually heard? Because the grand jury was seated for some 3 months. They heard an awful lot of witnesses. They heard an awful lot of testimony. We don't know what they heard. The prosecutor says they're going to appeal to a judge to try to release that information. To you, is that going to be critical in trying to determine what happened?
Absolutely, Anderson. In this case, you know the old adage, they say you could indict a ham sandwich. You probably heard it 1,000 times. That's absolutely true. Very rarely, in my experience, in the federal law enforcement system and with the NYPD, does someone not get indicted. I was kind of surprised. Again, not getting into the specifics of it, but most people get indicted just to, all you're doing is establishing probable cause that a crime did in fact happen, and they charged so many different, from reckless endangerment to manslaughter. I think a lot of police officers were surprised as well, so I think exposing the evidence the grand jury saw would be very helpful, because there may be something here you and I and your audience here doesn't know.
Charles, I want to give you a final
again,
thought.
That does not follow the science, right? So the Wall Street Journal has up a study on its site tonight. They published tonight. Only 41 officers in the last 7 years have been charged with either murder or manslaughter in a shooting, on-duty shootings in the whole United States. This is not, it is a very rare thing that that officers actually get held accountable for killing people on the street. That is what the science shows.
No, he was talking about prosecutors bringing indictments in general, not necessarily against police officers, clearly against police officers. And we've seen time again in studies, jurors often give the presumption of doubt to police officers. So that's not exactly what Dan was talking about. But Charles, I appreciate you being on, Michaela as well, Dan Bongino as well. I want to go back to our Chris Cuomo, who's in the